Elena Brooks froze in the doorway of Nathaniel Vale's penthouse office, her tablet clutched against her chest as she watched her billionaire boss slip a small velvet box into his desk drawer, the same drawer where she'd just seen a marriage certificate with someone else's name on it. The evening had started like any other. Elena had arrived at Vale Industries headquarters at precisely 7 p.m. to deliver the quarterly reports Nathaniel had requested. The 52nd floor was empty except for the security guards, and she'd used her keycard to access the executive suite. What she hadn't expected was to find her notoriously private boss hunched over legal documents. A woman's photograph spread across his mahogany desk. "Mr. Vale," she called softly. Stepping into the room, Nathaniel's head snapped up, his steel gray eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. At 41, he was devastatingly handsome in the way that powerful men often were, sharp jawline, perfectly tailored suits, and an aura of control that commanded every room he entered. But tonight, something was different. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened, and there was a vulnerability in his expression she'd never seen before. "Elena," his voice was rough, like he'd been talking for hours. "I didn't expect you tonight." "You asked for the Morrison reports," she reminded him, placing her tablet on the edge of his desk. Her eyes couldn't help but drift to the scattered papers among them. She glimpsed what looked like a prenuptial agreement and several photographs of a woman she didn't recognize, elegant, blonde, nothing like herself. Nathaniel followed her gaze and quickly gathered the documents. "Those are confidential." Of course, Elena had been his executive assistant for 3 years. She was the keeper of his secrets, the guardian of his schedule, the one person who knew his coffee order, his mother's birthday, and exactly how he liked his meetings structured. But this felt different, personal, dangerous, actually, Nathaniel said, his voice taking on that commanding tone she knew so well. "Since you're here, there's something I need to discuss with you." Elena straightened, falling back into her professional demeanor. "Certainly, sir." "Sit down, Elena. Please." The please was what made her nervous. Nathaniel Vale didn't say please. He gave orders, made requests, stated expectations. Please implied he needed something from her, and in her experience, when billionaires needed things, it usually meant trouble for everyone else. She settled into the leather chair across from his desk, noting how the city lights cast shadows across his face. From this height, Manhattan looked like a glittering toy set. All possibilities and dreams. It was easy to forget, sometimes, that real people with real problems lived in those lights below. "I'm going to ask you something," Nathaniel began, "and I need you to hear me out completely before you respond." Elena nodded, though her pulse had begun to quicken. "I need you to marry me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Elena blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry. What?" "Not marry me," Nathaniel corrected quickly. "I need you to pretend to marry me for 6 months, maybe less." Elena stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. "Mr. Vale, I think you should probably—" "The Yamamoto merger," he interrupted. "The one worth $8 billion. Kenji Yamamoto is old-fashioned, traditional. He won't do business with unmarried men. Says it shows a lack of commitment, an inability to honor long-term agreements. So marry someone," Elena said weakly. "I can't." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Not really. Not anyone who would understand what this business requires. But you." He gestured toward her. "You know me. You know my work. You know how to handle the media, the investors, the pressure." Elena's mind was racing. This was insane. Completely, utterly insane. "Mr. Vale, I'm flattered, but $5 million. The number hit her like a physical blow. $5 million. Enough to pay for her brother David's cancer treatments. Enough to get her parents out of debt. Enough to change everything. $5 million, she repeated slowly. "For 6 months of your life. Public appearances, a few events. Maybe some photos, nothing more. It would be strictly professional." Elena looked at him, really looked at him, despite his wealth and power, despite the commanding presence that made CEOs twice his age defer to his judgment. There was something almost desperate in his eyes. "Why me?" "Because I trust you," he said simply. "And because you're the only person I know who won't try to make it real." The words stung more than they should have. Elena had spent 3 years being invisible to him as anything other than an efficient assistant. She'd watched him date models and socialites, women who looked nothing like her with her sensible brown hair and off-the-rack business suits. She'd told herself she didn't care, that their relationship was purely professional. But apparently, even he could see that she was not the kind of woman men like him fell for. "I need time to think," she said. Of course, Nathaniel reached into his desk drawer, the same one where she'd seen him hide the velvet box, and pulled out a thick legal document. "This is the contract. Read it carefully. We'll discuss it tomorrow." Elena took the papers with hands that weren't quite steady. "And if I say no," something flickered across Nathaniel's face, "then I'll understand." "But Elena," he leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice." Elena hadn't slept. She'd spent the entire night reading and rereading the contract Nathaniel had given her, each page more surreal than the last. By dawn, she understood exactly what he was asking of her and exactly what she'd be risking. The contract was thorough, she'd give him that. 27 pages of legal language that essentially boiled down to pretend to be in love with Nathaniel Vale for 6 months, convince the world their relationship was real, and walk away $5 million richer. It sounded simple enough until she reached the penalty clause. Should the contracted party terminate this agreement before the specified end date for any reason, other than those outlined in Section 12A, said party agrees to forfeit all compensation and pay a penalty of $5 million to the contracting party. Elena set down her coffee mug with shaking hands. $5 million. The same amount he was offering to pay her was exactly what she'd owe him if she backed out early. It was brilliant, really. A perfect trap wrapped in a generous offer. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother David. "Another round of chemo today. The doctors are optimistic. Don't worry about the bills, sis. We'll figure it out." Elena closed her eyes. David always tried to protect her, even now when he was the one fighting for his life. The treatments were experimental, not covered by insurance, and cost more than their entire family made in a year. She'd already drained her savings, maxed out her credit cards, even considered taking out loans she'd never be able to repay. $5 million would solve everything. Her phone rang. Nathaniel's name flashing on the screen. "Good morning, Elena. I trust you've had time to review the documents. I have questions," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Of course, my office, 1 hour. Actually, I'd prefer somewhere more private. This conversation shouldn't happen at Vale Industries." There was a pause. "The Carlisle Hotel has a restaurant on the top floor. Quiet, discreet. 1 hour. Ellen arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table with a view of Central Park. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows should have been beautiful, but all she could think about was how different her life might be by the end of this conversation. Nathaniel appeared exactly on time, looking impeccable as always in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in a month. He sat across from her, ordering coffee from the hovering waiter with the kind of casual authority that came from never having to wait for anything. "You look tired," he observed. "I didn't sleep much." Elena pulled out the contract, her copy now filled with highlighted sections and handwritten notes in the margins. "This penalty clause is non-negotiable," Nathaniel finished. "Elena, I need to know that you're committed to seeing this through. The Yamamoto deal is worth billions, not just to me but to everyone who works for Vale Industries. If you agree to this and then change your mind halfway through, it could destroy everything. And if something happens, if I get sick, or my family needs me, or Section 12A covers emergency situations, family illness, personal injury, anything beyond your control, you'd be released from the contract with full compensation." Elena nodded, though she noticed he didn't mention what would happen if she simply fell apart under the pressure. "The public appearances, how often are we talking? Maybe twice a week. Business dinners, charity galas, the occasional interview. Nothing too invasive. And the living arrangements," Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. "You'd need to move into my penthouse. Separate bedrooms, of course, but we need to sell the illusion that we're actually together." The thought of living with him of sharing space with the man who'd occupied so many of her private thoughts over the years. Made her stomach flip. For 6 months. 6 months, he confirmed. After the Yamamoto contract is signed, we'll announce that we've realized we're better as friends. Amicable split. No hard feelings. Everyone moves on with their lives. Elena stared out at the park, watching early morning joggers weave between the trees. Such a normal view of such normal people living their uncomplicated lives. Why didn't you just hire an actress? Someone who does this professionally? Because actresses talk to tabloids. They write tell-all books. They have agents and publicists and careers to think about. Nathaniel leaned forward, his voice dropping. You've been keeping my secrets for 3 years, Elena. I know I can trust you. Trust. The word hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. And after, what happens to my job? You'll always have a place at Vale Industries, if you want it, with a significant raise. Of course. Elena looked down at the contract again, at the paragraph that would change everything. I need guarantees about David's treatment. If I'm doing this, his medical expenses get paid immediately, and there needs to be a fund set up in case. Done. Nathaniel didn't even hesitate. I'll have my lawyers add that clause today. And I want it in writing that this is strictly professional. No expectations beyond what's outlined in the contract. Something flickered in Nathaniel's eyes. Disappointment. Relief, of course. Elena picked up the pen the waiter had left beside the check. Her hand hovered over the signature line as she thought about David in his hospital bed, about her parents' mortgage, about the life she could build with $5 million. But she also thought about the man sitting across from her, the way he'd looked at her last night with something almost like vulnerability. If I do this, she said slowly, if I sign this contract and move into your penthouse and play the role of your loving fiancé, what happens if one of us starts to feel something real? Nathaniel's expression didn't change, but she saw him swallow hard. That won't happen. How can you be so sure? Because I don't do real relationships, Elena. I don't do love or forever or any of the things that normal people want. This is business. Nothing more. The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like a warning. Elena signed her name with a flourish that belied her racing heart. I guess we're engaged, Mr. Vale. For the first time since she'd known him, Nathaniel Vale smiled a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. I guess we are, Ms. Brooks and Elena. When we're in public, you should probably call me Nathaniel. 3 weeks into their engagement, Elena was beginning to understand why actors needed stunt doubles. The constant performance was exhausting. Smile more, Nathaniel murmured against her ear as they posed for photographers at the Metropolitan Museum's annual gala. His arm was wrapped around her waist, his hand warm against the silk of her dress, a designer gown that probably cost more than her old apartment's rent. Elena tilted her head toward him, letting her lips curve into what she hoped looked like an adoring smile. I am smiling. You look like you're in pain. I am in pain. These shoes are torture devices. Nathaniel's laugh was genuine, and she felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. Over the past few weeks, they'd developed an odd rhythm. In public, they were the picture of a happy couple touching, laughing, gazing into each other's eyes with practiced affection. In private, in the penthouse they now shared, they maintained careful distance, professional courtesy with occasional moments of surprising warmth. Mr. Vale, Elena, a photographer called out. Could we get one of you looking at each other? Elena turned toward Nathaniel, and for a moment, the cameras and crowds faded away. Up close, she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the faint scar on his jaw from a childhood accident he'd mentioned once during a late-night work session. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Better, he said softly, so only she could hear. The spell was broken by a sharp voice behind them. Well, the happy couple. Elena turned to see Mira Lang approaching, her smile razor sharp and her eyes calculating. As Vale Industries head of public relations, Mira had been instrumental in managing their public relationship, but Elena had never shaken the feeling that the other woman was looking for cracks in their performance. Mira, Nathaniel said smoothly, you look lovely tonight. Thank you. Mira's gaze swept over Elena's dress, her jewelry, her carefully styled hair. "That's quite a transformation, Elena. I hardly recognized you." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. It was true the past few weeks had been a complete makeover. Personal, stylists, makeup artists, media training. She looked the part of a billionaire's fiancée now. But sometimes she felt like she was wearing a costume. "Elena's always been beautiful," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "I'm just lucky she finally noticed me." It was the story they'd crafted together, that they'd fallen in love slowly, over months of working together, but had kept it secret until now. It was plausible enough, and it explained why no one had seen them together romantically before. "How romantic," Mira said dryly. "I don't suppose you've set a date yet." "We're thinking spring," Elena said quickly, nothing to elaborate. "Of course not. After all, you'll want to focus on the Yamamoto merger. I assume that's still your priority, Nathaniel." Elena felt Nathaniel tense beside her. Business is always a priority, but tonight is about celebrating the arts. "Shall we head inside?" As they walked through the museum's grand hallways, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that Mira suspected something. The PR executive was too smart, too observant, and she'd known Nathaniel for years. If anyone could see through their charade, it would be her. The evening progressed in a blur of introductions, small talk, and carefully orchestrated photo opportunities. Elena found herself actually enjoying parts of it. The art was magnificent. The food was excellent, and when Nathaniel wasn't performing for the cameras, he was surprisingly good company. He was more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, telling her stories about the other guests, pointing out details in the paintings that revealed his unexpected knowledge of art history. "You're full of surprises," she said as they stood before a Monet water lily painting. "How so?" "I've been your assistant for 3 years, and I never knew you were interested in art." Nathaniel's expression grew thoughtful. "There are a lot of things you don't know about me, Elena. That's what makes this interesting," she found herself saying, then immediately regretted it. This wasn't supposed to be interesting. It was supposed to be business. Before Nathaniel could respond, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. "Well, if it isn't my little brother and his mysterious new fiancée." Elena turned to see a man who looked like an older, slightly more polished version of Nathaniel approaching them. His smile was charming, but there was something predatory in his eyes that made her instinctively step closer to Nathaniel. "Sebastian," Nathaniel said flatly, "I didn't know you were in town. I wouldn't miss the Met Gala. Besides, I had to meet the woman who finally captured your heart." Sebastian turned his attention to Elena, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips in an old-fashioned gesture that somehow felt inappropriate. Sebastian Vale, Nathaniel's older, wiser, much more charming brother. "Elena Brooks," she said, reclaiming her hand as quickly as possible. "Brooks," Sebastian mused. "Any relation to the Brooks family that owns half of Connecticut?" "No," Elena said simply. Well, we can't all be born lucky, can we?" Sebastian's smile didn't waver, but Elena felt the insult like a slap. "So tell me, Elena, how exactly did you manage to snare Manhattan's most eligible bachelor? I have to admit, I'm curious about your techniques." Elena felt Nathaniel move beside her, his entire body radiating tension. "Sebastian, I'm just making conversation," Sebastian said innocently. "After all, it's quite a fairy tale, isn't it? The assistant and the billionaire. Very Cinderella." "If you'll excuse us," Nathaniel said coldly, "Elena and I were just leaving." "So soon? But the night is young," Sebastian called after them as Nathaniel guided Elena away. "We should have dinner soon. I have so many questions about this whirlwind romance." In the car ride home, Elena stared out the window at the city lights, trying to process what had just happened. Sebastian's hostility had been thinly veiled, but his suspicion had been crystal clear. "Your brother doesn't like me," she said finally. "My brother doesn't like anyone," Nathaniel replied. "Don't take it personally. He suspects something." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Sebastian's been trying to find a way to take control of Vale Industries for years. He'll look for any weakness, any excuse to challenge my leadership, and a fake engagement would certainly qualify, which is why I can't be fake," Nathaniel said quietly. "At least, not in public. We need to be more convincing." Elena turned to look at him. More convincing how we need to sell the chemistry, the connection. People need to believe we're actually in love. The word love hung in the air between them. Elena's heart began to race, though she wasn't sure if it was from fear or something else entirely. I don't know if I'm that good an actress, she admitted. Nathaniel reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. Then don't act, just be yourself. The woman I've watched laugh at terrible jokes during late-night meetings. The woman who remembers everyone's birthday and makes sure the office is stocked with good coffee. The woman who's brilliant and kind and stronger than she knows. Elena stared at him, shocked by the warmth in his voice. Nathaniel, I mean it, he said softly. You don't need to pretend to be someone else, Elena. You just need to let people see who you really are. For a moment, sitting in the back of his car, with his hand in hers and his voice soft with something that sounded dangerously like affection, Elena almost forgot that this was all pretend, almost forgot about the contract and the penalty clause and the $5 million, almost let herself believe that this could be real. But then the car pulled up to his building, and the spell was broken. They were back to being two people playing roles, no matter how convincing the performance might be. Elena discovered that living with Nathaniel Vale was like sharing space with a ghost. He left for work before she woke up, returned after she'd gone to bed, and communicated through carefully placed notes on the kitchen counter. Dinner at La Bernardine, 7 p.m. Car will pick you up at 6:30. Interview with Vanity Fair tomorrow at 3. Casual but elegant. Thank you for handling the Morrison situation. It should have been easier this way, maintaining professional distance even while sharing the same living space. But instead, Elena found herself missing their late-night conversations at the office. The way he'd sometimes look up from his work to ask her opinion on a deal. The rare moments when his guard would drop and she'd catch glimpses of the man beneath the billionaire exterior. Now, for weeks into their arrangement, those moments were becoming more frequent and infinitely more dangerous. You don't have to hide in your room, you know, Nathaniel said one evening. Finding her on the terrace with her laptop and a cup of tea, Elena looked up, surprised. It was only 8 o'clock, early for him to be home. I wasn't hiding. I was working. On what? He settled into the chair across from her, and she noticed he'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves. It was the most relaxed she'd seen him since they'd started this charade. Actually, I was researching Kenji Yamamoto, she admitted. I wanted to understand what we're working toward. What's at stake? Nathaniel's expression grew serious. And what did you find? That he's as traditional as you said. Family man, married to his college sweetheart for 30 years, 3 children, who all work in the family business. But also that he's been burned before by American companies who promised partnerships and delivered acquisitions, which is why this deal matters so much. Nathaniel said quietly, it's not just about the money, Elena. Yamamoto Industries has technology that could revolutionize sustainable energy. If we can partner with them instead of having them sell to one of our competitors, you could change the world, Elena finished. We could change the world, he corrected. This isn't just my company anymore. When you signed that contract, you became invested in its success too. The weight of that responsibility settled over Elena like a heavy cloak. She'd been so focused on the money, on David's medical bills and her family's financial security, that she hadn't fully considered what success would mean for everyone else, the thousands of people who worked for Vale Industries, the potential impact on global energy sustainability, the ripple effects of a deal this size. No pressure, she said wryly. Nathaniel smiled, one of his rare, genuine smiles that transformed his entire face. You're handling the pressure better than most people. Most people aren't getting paid $5 million to handle it. Something flickered across Nathaniel's face at the mention of money. But before Elena could analyze it, her phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen. I should take this, she said, already answering. Hey, how are you feeling actually? Feeling pretty good today. David's voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. The new treatment is working, Elena. The doctors are optimistic that we might be able to reduce the frequency of sessions. Elena closed her eyes, relief flooding through her. That's wonderful news. I keep meaning to ask, how did you manage to get the insurance to cover this? They were so adamant before that it was experimental. Elena's eyes flew open, meeting Nathaniel's concerned gaze. I found a way to work with them. Well, whatever you did. Thank you. I know you've been worried about the cost, but you don't need to be anymore. Your big brother is going to beat this thing. After she hung up, Elena sat in silence, staring at her phone. The lie sat heavy in her stomach. David thought his insurance had finally come through. Had no idea that his sister had entered into a fake engagement to pay for his treatment. Good news? Nathaniel asked gently. The treatment is working, Elena said, then immediately felt guilty for the relief in her voice. This was exactly why she'd signed the contract, but somehow it felt wrong to be happy about David's progress when it was built on deception. That's wonderful, Nathaniel said, and he sounded like he meant it. You must be relieved. I am. Elena trailed off, not sure how to explain the complicated mix of emotions churning inside her. You feel guilty, Nathaniel observed. About the lie. Elena nodded, surprised by his understanding. David's always been the strong one. Even when we were kids, he was the one taking care of everyone else. Now he's fighting for his life, and I'm lying to him about how I'm paying for his treatment. You're taking care of your family, Nathaniel said firmly. That's not something to feel guilty about, even when it involves fake engagements and $5 million contracts. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city. Lights. My father built Vale Industries from nothing, he said finally. He worked 18-hour days, missed birthdays and holidays, sacrificed everything for the business. When I was young, I resented him for it. I thought he cared more about money than his family. Elena waited, sensing there was more. It wasn't until after he died that I found his journals. Pages and pages about wanting to leave something behind for Sebastian and me. About building a legacy that would take care of the people he loved long after he was gone. Nathaniel's voice was soft, almost vulnerable. He didn't work those long hours because he loved money. Elena, he did it because he loved us, and you. Think what I'm doing is the same. I think you love your brother enough to make an enormous sacrifice for him. I think you're willing to give up 6 months of your life, your privacy, your comfort, to make sure he gets the care he needs. That's not something to be ashamed of. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. Nathaniel reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Your family is lucky to have you. The touch sent electricity shooting up Elena's arm, and she found herself looking into his eyes, really looking. In the soft light of the terrace, with his guard down and his voice gentle, he looked nothing like the cold, calculating businessman the media portrayed. He looked like a man who understood sacrifice, who carried his own burdens, who might be just as lonely as she sometimes felt. Nathaniel, she whispered, not sure what she was going to say. I should let you get back to work, he said abruptly, pulling his hand away and standing up. The moment was broken, the walls snapping back into place with almost audible force. Elena watched him retreat into the penthouse, her hands still tingling where he'd touched her. This was dangerous territory, the growing warmth between them, the moments of genuine connection. The way her heart raced whenever he looked at her like she mattered. She was supposed to be playing a role, but somewhere along the way, the lines had started to blur. And the scariest part wasn't that she might be falling for Nathaniel Vale. The scariest part was that she was beginning to suspect he might be falling for her. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Interesting photos from tonight's dinner. Call me if you want to know what I know about your engagement. A friend. Alina's blood ran cold. Someone was watching them. Someone knew something, and suddenly, the $5 million penalty clause felt less like insurance and more like a trap that was about to snap shut. The blackmail photos arrived on a Tuesday morning, spread across Elena's desk like evidence at a crime scene. Her and Nathaniel at dinner 3 nights ago, but not the carefully posed shots that had appeared in the society pages. These were different, candid, revealing. In one, Nathaniel was leaning away from her, checking his phone with obvious disinterest while she spoke. In another, they were sitting in silence, both staring out the window with the practiced patience of two people who had nothing to say to each other. The final photo was the most damaging. Nathaniel's face caught in an unguarded moment, his expression cold and calculating as he watched Elena sign something, even without context. It was clear this was a business transaction, not a romantic relationship. The accompanying note was brief: $500. Zero, or these go to every major news outlet in the city. You have 48 hours. Elena's hands were shaking as she reached for her phone to call Nathaniel. But his office door opened before she could dial. Elena, I need you to. He stopped when he saw her face. What's wrong? Wordlessly, she handed him the envelope. She watched his expression grow darker with each photo, his jaw tightening until she could see the muscle tick beneath his skin. Do you recognize the photographer? She asked. No, but I know who hired them. Nathaniel's voice was deadly quiet. My brother, Sebastian. How can you be sure? Because he's done this before. Different circumstances, same tactic. Nathaniel gathered the photos and shoved them back into the envelope. He's been looking for leverage against me for years. Elena felt sick. So he knows about the contract, about everything. He suspects. These photos prove we're not as convincing as we thought, but they don't prove the engagement is fake. $500,000, Elena said weakly. That's more than I make in 10 years. We're not paying him, Nathaniel. If these photos get out, they won't. His voice carried absolute certainty. Trust me. But Elena's trust was wavering. The past 5 weeks had been a careful balance of performance and growing genuine affection. But now the weight of the deception was crushing. Every public appearance, every loving gesture, every carefully crafted social media post, it was all built on a lie that was about to come crashing down. Maybe we should just end this, she said quietly. Call off the engagement, pay the penalty, and cut our losses. Nathaniel went very still. Is that what you want? Elena looked at him really. Looked at him. Over the past weeks, she'd seen him laugh at her terrible jokes, worry about David's treatment, work until 3 a.m. to make sure a deal was perfect. She'd seen him defend her to Mira, stand up to Sebastian's subtle cruelty, and look at her sometimes like she was the most fascinating person in the room. Either he was the world's greatest actor, or somewhere along the way, this had stopped being entirely fake for him too. I don't know what I want anymore, she admitted. Before Nathaniel could respond, his office door burst open. Mira strode in, her usually perfect composure cracked with excitement. We have a problem, she announced, then stopped when she saw Elena. Oh, you're both here, good. What kind of problem? Nathaniel asked. The kind where Vanity Fair just called to verify a story about your engagement being a business arrangement. Mira's smile was sharp as a blade. Apparently, they have photos. Elena felt the world tilt sideways. How? It doesn't matter how, Mira continued. What matters is damage control. We need to get ahead of this story before it destroys not just your reputation, Nathaniel, but the Yamamoto deal. What do you recommend? Nathaniel's voice was carefully controlled, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. Full disclosure, we call a press conference. You admit the engagement started as a business arrangement, but that you've since fallen genuinely in love. It's romantic, it's honest, and it gives you control of the narrative. Elena stared at her. You want us to admit it's fake. Was fake, Mira corrected. Past tense. The story becomes about how a practical arrangement became real love. The media loves that kind of fairy tale. And if Mr. Yamamoto doesn't buy it, Elena asked, then we hope he values honesty over convention, Mira said bluntly. Because right now, those are our only options. After Mira left to arrange the press conference, Elena and Nathaniel sat in silence. The walls of his office, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. We don't have to do this, Nathaniel said finally. We could pay Sebastian's blackmail, ride out the 6 months, and hope no one else figures it out. You said we weren't paying him. I'll pay him, not you. Elena shook her head. That's not how this works. We're partners in this, remember? Partners, Nathaniel repeated. And there was something strange in his voice. Elena, there's something I need to tell you about the contract. Something in his tone made her stomach drop. What? The penalty clause. The $5 million you'd owe if you broke the contract early. Nathaniel couldn't meet her eyes. It's not enforceable. Elena stared at him. What do you mean? Not enforceable. I mean a good lawyer could get you out of it in about 10 minutes. The terms are too harsh, the power dynamic too unequal. No court would uphold it. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "So all this time, I could have just left." "Yes, and you didn't tell me because?" "Because I needed you to stay," Nathaniel said quietly. "Because I was selfish and desperate, and I thought if you knew you could leave without consequences, you would." Elena stood up abruptly.